I think we don't have any legal remote participation or any other emergency powers to invoke.
Correct.
So we will begin the April Board Policy Committee meeting. And we'll start with patron confidentiality. So where we had left this, my recollection is that we were kind of, the underlying law had come to our attention and we tried to read it and couldn't figure out what it meant. And we decided to take that to our counsel. So David, I believe that they would report to us what he learned from that.
Yes, so council suggested that that this likely would be in violation of the law, that any child under 18 would have their parents would have full access to their accounts. So I think the intention prior to this wording here was that the parents would have access to information about the account, such as the kid's name, address, birthday, things like that, but not what they had checked out. And the council's opinion was that they would have full access. So he suggested that we make this change in policy.
So I have a question.
Go ahead.
The line where it says the parent or guardian who has signed the child's application. So does that mean if you have a parent who hasn't signed the application, that parent doesn't have legal access to the information?
No, I think it means that we would provide that without asking any follow-up questions, basically. So if there's a line, if there's an item in your account that says, say you were Ginny's parent and Ginny had something in her card that said Martha Ledford has full access to the account, then you show up, you identify yourself as Martha Ledford and we immediately give you access. If somebody else showed up and they said, I'm Ginny's parents, there would be some procedural hoops for them to jump through. We wouldn't just give anybody that information. We would want to ascertain that they were in fact a parent or guardian.
Parents who were divorced.
Yes, this comes up. Yeah, so staff, any parent or guardian, we would give access to, but we would likely do some work to try to ascertain and make sure that was actually a parent or guardian before turning over any identifying information.
Okay, but we have in here who has signed the child's application.
So Mark,
Is that limited?
well, I'm looking at the following sentence. It says other adults may be granted full access according to standard permissions procedures.
Oh, okay, that's what I was saying.
Yeah, so I think that's what David is saying. It's not limited to, but the immediate access is limited to somebody who signed.
Yeah, that was my intention.
Yeah.
Kayla's reporting that she's having a hard time hearing you two from that end, so we'll have to project as best as we can.
And are these standard permission procedures, are those documented procedure, or is that something that we're referring to state law here? What does that?
I think we're referring to JMRL's documented procedures, which would be in our circulation manual
So
for
that's
staff.
all right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But do we need a point to clarify that? Martha, like reading it in a totality, does it make sense now, or do you think that we need to do anything to make it?
I think it's clear.
Okay, so David, I think we wanted to have, so the simplest thing we can do now is change this policy to say 18. But I wanted to just briefly remind everyone of the larger context, because we have this question system-wide of who counts as a minor or versus a child, and it touches on a lot of different pieces and parts. So it is possible to have different thresholds for different types of services. And would that be the case if we change this? Are we still talking about 16 in some places?
I think we'd have to go back through that list of every place that we have a codified difference, because there may be, I could see a circumstance where there's like some equipment at a branch that they want 16 and up to be able to use that we wouldn't necessarily tie to this policy.
Right, or fines and fees, for example.
Right.
It's right, if we pass this as written,
Yes.
what would be the situation regarding fines and fees?
Fines and fees would no longer be applicable for 16 and 17-year-old users.
So I'm potentially fine with that, but I don't see how changing confidentiality to 18
This is the only place in policy that the board has said, here is the age of adulthood.
And we discussed a little bit of this, but partly reviewing and partly bringing everyone else kind of into the conversation. It doesn't say here that 18 is a minor, it just says for purposes of confidentiality, that's the threshold we use. So a question for people to think about, and which I would read this question out. I don't think we need to do any specific action today necessarily. Do we want, does it matter that if it's 18 versus 16 everywhere? I'm open to it not being the same. But as you're saying, if we wanted it to be different somewhere else, those probably need to be. I think what I'm hearing is it's not written down anywhere. It just used the general characterization.
The only other place was in the fines and fees policy, which the full board is going to be describing. What hasn't changed yet, it's back up today for the vote.
We're talking about making that generic,
yes,
so that we can refer to some other.
Yes.
So, one brainstorm is we have a new policy that says, what would be the title?
Age of adulthood, I guess.
Adulthood at JMRL, and then you could point everything else back to that, and then if you wanted to make a change, it would reflect everywhere else. I'm just not clear. I mean, we can do whatever we want procedurally. I'm just not clear that changing something that just talks about confidentiality makes a clear implication for every other policy. If it looks suspicious, skeptical.
Well, there's nothing signed the library card, and at this point, my understanding is we're going to be asking anyone under 18 to have their parents sign the library card.
Right.
Not the people before. So I think that would be confusing for patrons if you're now asking for the parent to sign also for these ages, but those ages are not getting the fine-free situation like the other minors are that they're signing for.
They are going to be fine-free.
Yeah, they will be juvenile cards.
Right.
They'll be the
But
same as.
that was not necessarily.
I'm just saying, I don't see that being written down anywhere except for here.
I think it was more that discussion was happening. The only place that it was written down is the fines and fees schedule, basically, where it said juvenile cards under 16 have these fines and fees. So in looking at where else do we have this information, this policy was the only other place there. And it became apparent that this probably wasn't compliant with the current interpretation of the law.
Right.
So I don't know that it was necessarily a straight line that one was going to the other. I think the change is happening as long as the board changes the fines and
Let me
fees.
ask a different way.
Sure.
I'm just walking in the door of the public. Where is it communicated to me what a juvenile card means and who signs for that?
I think it's on our welcome brochure and the card application.
And those right now say 16 specifically, but you would procedurally change that to 18 to reflect this.
Yeah, that would change.
Yeah, they call it FAQ.
Right.
Because the things that are changing here is that like currently not, and I hear your point because it's not reflected in this policy that we're talking about, but currently the parents are responsible for things checked out on a kid's card up until they reach the end of 15. Then after that, in theory, the juvenile is responsible for it. So right now we treat 16-year-olds as you're getting an adult card, you're responsible for it, you're paying the fines on it. Welcome to being a grown-up. So we're about to change that to 18 so that the parents now need to sign off because they are the ones that are ultimately responsible for the materials until the kid turns 18.
Grandfather clause on that.
Sure.
That those people who currently hold this card.
Yeah.
We're not gonna do
No, but I also don't think it would be an issue because right now the kids are responsible. So there is no direct line to the parents where if the parent comes in, we're going to say, oh, by the way, we turned your adult kid into a kid and now you owe this money. That wouldn't happen. It would only be moving forward where we would need their parents' permission on it.
So we would have to change some.
Yeah, we have to change some procedural
Right now,
things.
It says the library card application for parent or guardian of minor applicant under 16, so
Yeah.
that implies that that's the definition.
Have to change it, yeah, and all the procedures that we run to kind of change those cards. It doesn't happen automatically. There's work that needs to happen, like that needs to change. So that's why we had talked about making a shift midsummer, I believe, July.
Policy or the application form also. It doesn't say an age, it just says minor.
Yeah, I think that's to
Doesn't
Mike's
define
point.
minor.
we were looking at a few of those things, because Patrick did a big job a few years ago to identify all these places that had ages. That where it does say minor or juvenile, we could have a policy that says, here's what that means to JMRL.
Right, so it's just, I don't have an issue with any of the changes I'm hearing made. That's just the question in my mind, does that need to be
More clear.
documented at a sort of at a policy level or not?
It's been confusing over the years. It's come up.
It has
a
been,
lot
it
of
comes up a
times.
lot.
The other
Yeah.
thing is you could have an emancipated 16 or 17. right?
Yeah, I think we would have some language in a policy that says, you know, in the event of emancipation. They can, because they're legally
Yeah.
their own guardian at that point.
You don't
And that
have
does
to
happen.
Have handy from Patrick.
I don't, but we could
Okay.
probably find it. Do you want to find it?
I think people are generally familiar with the concept, that there's a lot of little spots where it's a money.
Yeah.
There is a list of all of them currently.
And it's like, you know, it's basically using services where we have a separate form or procedure for using a service, like you want to check out interlibrary loans, or you want to use a meeting room, or you want to use
Laptop.
you want to check out a laptop, you want to take out one of our Wi-Fi things, hotspots, right?
But I guess my questions would be twofold, from a policy level, from a trustee level. Are you comfortable that in fact, the only thing it says is where it says 18 versus 16 is here in confidentiality, and the staff can kind of do. Is free to define whatever else they want, as far as I'm concerned. Just from a requirement of policy level right now, that's a degree of freedom. And then from the staff standpoint, would you rather have it documented at a policy level? To provide clarity all around.
I mean, I think it would be
don't
good.
have a strong lean either way.
I think it would be, I also don't have a strong feeling. I think it would be good to have something that we would, because as Krista said, this has been an issue over the
Right.
years, right?
Opens up interpretation.
And I think one of the reasons it's been a gray area is because we have tried very hard to create an environment for teens to come in and feel like they have some autonomy and they can use the library and some freedom there. And we don't want to squash that, you know, but we also want to make sure it's a balance. We want to make sure parents are aware of what they're, you know, that their kid is using at the library or has available to them.
Okay, so am I hearing that, it's worth trying to make a policy draft that describes what is a minor in JMRL?
Sure.
If it's not worth it, we don't have to jump to that. Okay.
I think that's how I found it
Yeah,
with Jenny's face.
You know, like if the kid was in a hot spot, the
Yeah.
parent's gonna be on for that, you know?
Well, the kid's not gonna have the money for it for the
That's
most part.
part,
Yeah.
So. You know,
But now we're clarifying that, you
yeah,
know,
Yeah,
regardless of whether we have a policy, that kid's gonna need a parent to sign to say they're responsible for these materials moving forward.
yeah, it makes it easier for staff, it's just easy.
One thing, yeah. I think that's one of the goals. So Mike, do you want to add that to a future agenda?
Well, I'm come up with the simplest possible.
I mean, I think we're talking about like a couple sentences, really.
Well, then you start talking about emancipated and so forth, so maybe, but hopefully, yes. And we can put some wiggle room in it if I say generally 18, you know, which would still give.
Yeah, some specific services might.
Yeah, staff freedom to maybe have exceptions, you know, without having to go at a policy level.
Okay, that sounds
Okay,
good.
We'll see what we can come. Okay, any other, so we will, unless I hear differently right now, we will recommend this change of 16 to 18 to the full board and have a first reading of that. You know, minimal change as far as confidentiality goes today.
Mhm.
Okay,
Sounds
all
good.
right. Continuing to our next item is the library employees code of ethics. And we had a good discussion on this last month. And this is taking into account all the suggestions and feedback received. This is the kind of draft that David and I put together. We felt was a good effort at reflecting, you know, from what we've heard from the discussion so far. So it's open for comments.
I want to thank you for your work on that. I think it's
Welcome.
really a really good job there.
And just to remind everybody, this would be combining the two current ones so we would be asking the board to remove I think, public employees code of ethics, because that language is now, we attempted to get that language into the top paragraph there.
Yeah, it's basically just subsumed by the sentence. JMRL employees are bound by the guidance on ethics in the city of Charlottesville personnel policies. And at the same time. Probably, well, okay, I think, a trustee who's trying to, evaluate this whole package and hasn't been part of the conversation, I think I would like to see. It's my understanding you would intend to make some changes to
The handbook.
employee handbook.
Yeah.
We probably wouldn't hurt to endorse that every once in a while anyways. We
Yeah.
talked about. So I would maybe present those red lines if they're not in this.
Yeah, I've got a separate document
Okay,
that's
once
got that.
we do present this to the board, kind of show. It's not a policy, but it would be here are the supporting actions we're taking. That. Demonstrate that we're moving essentially the public employee code of ethics from a policy level to this. To the handbook level.
And those,
or personnel policy.
those were largely the things that Camille identified as being not explicit in our handbook
Correct.
that we thought staff would like to know.
Okay. But then other thoughts, comments on the tweaks here that were essentially summarizing ALA into our own version.
I think for the most part, it encompasses important things that we want to add in there. There's one piece that I felt like I would like to have in there about, and I know dismantling is a heavy word. Dismantling is not the word I'm attached to, but the idea of recognizing and trying to get rid of bias in our institution and in ourselves feels like a very important ethic. And I think that because of how all of the terms in this ALA portion have a very politicized charge to them. The person that comes to mind might be just racial bias or, anti-LGBTQ bias or something like that, but it really applies in all directions of political spectrum, culturally, like anything you can think of that as information professionals who are providing information, like our own biases are really an important part of this process.
Is that already in our mission and values statements, those ideas?
And I also would think of the non-discrimination policy, as which to the extent it would apply, it's going to be more legalistic, probably.
Yeah.
I mean, the beginning of that sentence of harming inherent dignity and rights of every person. Also,
Overcome bias. Might be
Yeah, overcome would be a less. problematic word.
Or even just adding. I don't know, maybe this doesn't get to the heart of what you're talking about, but provide unbiased access to.
Yeah.
It's less strong. Yeah.
If we're providing that,
Right.
side, yeah.
In number 9 there.
Yeah.
Mike, thoughts?
Sure.
So at least it addresses
Yeah.
the issue that the library needs to provide unbiased and by, I guess this is directed at individual staff, like
Right.
this is your code of ethics.
Yeah.
Less so than the mission and value also directed at both the organization and the individuals that make up the organization, but this is more directed at staff.
Having that there. looks good.
Martha, sound okay?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, I would like, so I'm also happy with where I'd like to sit with this, I think, for one more meeting. And we'll do a quick, and that'll give you time to kind of put together the
handbook.
handbook handout. So if we, in other words, if we were to proceed to a first reading today, we wouldn't have that available, and
Right.
it would be useful to have that as part of the package. So I would suggest putting that together and either probably you tell me if it would be okay by email to kind of confirm that there's no further discussion before next month's meeting, or it can wait until our next policy meeting. Before it goes to the board.
Okay.
You can tell me closer to next month.
There's another employee handbook change that the board, if we're gonna have the board review it,
Yeah.
or at least be aware of the changes that have happened, we changed that snow day, the tweak for the time off, basically. So there's more than just two changes have happened or will happen between now and the end of the year. So we could maybe even have a separate agenda line for like, hey, here are the
Right, you'll
changes.
re-endorse.
Yeah, here are the changes to the manual since the last time you endorsed it.
Okay.
Ginny's got thoughts.
David, could you pull up our mission, vision, and value?
It's good. I'm looking at it now. What do you want to
I
know?
just want to see what it says, because I don't read it every day.
It is really tiny writing here, so would you like me to read?
Oh, my
Okay. We serve our community. Our goal is to deliver exceptional service and honor our place at the center of the communities we support. We are committed to offering you qualified and well-trained staff equipped to meet your information needs. We appreciate diversity and are mindful of the culture and history of our organization, our region, and our communities. We provide free, equitable, open access to information. We carefully curate a collection of physical and electronic materials that reflect our community. We believe public libraries play a critical role in fostering a democratic society, and we embrace our responsibility to amplify a full spectrum of voices. We advocate for intellectual freedom and make your privacy a priority. We inspire lifelong learning. We provide education and experiences to community members at every stage of life. We strongly promote reading and writing and teach critical skills that help you navigate the world of information and technology. We offer free recreational and educational events for kids, teens, and adults where you can indulge your curiosity, explore your interests, and discover new passions. We cultivate a welcoming environment for community engagement. We want our libraries to be comfortable, inviting, accessible spaces where you can work and play. We create opportunities for people to connect, exchange ideas, and discover community resources. Our libraries are inclusive spaces for people of all backgrounds where everyone is welcomed and respected. We promote kindness and believe in service to the community. Get a drink of water.
Did that answer your question, Jimmy?
Yeah.
You were trying to make sure it was consistent.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that what we're trying to do is.
I think so. Yeah, I think.
Because this is about, well, I really like the way number 9 starts out, affirming the inherent dignity of rights of every person. And the rest of it is just about providing access to information, which is, was our first goal is at a library. We also do programs, I guess, I mean, that's really what we do.
Yeah, it matches our mission.
But this, what I'm trying to make sure that we say is that everyone is welcome in the library and that we don't discriminate. If you look different from me or our staff in some way, we are not discriminating. That's what I want to make sure we're saying.
Yeah, that comes across to me there.
I think to me, like the bias portion of it is the underlying mechanism for definitely not discriminating against people, right?
Yeah.
Like acknowledging that we have biases so that we can actively counteract them.
Yeah.
Work to provide unbiased. Yeah. Okay. So a procedural question then, Mike, because we are going to deprecate the public employees code of ethics. Should we just ask the full board should we just wait on that until we can explain the whole thing? Like, here's what we're doing.
To me, it's a package. Because
Okay.
otherwise you're.
Because it's on the agenda today. I mean, we could ask them to deprecate it today, but I think it makes sense to wait until we're ready for the whole, here's the new policy.
Noticed the element. Yeah, I think we should. It's to me, it's what.
They belong together. I agree. Jenny?
So in number 4, I don't know if I may have missed a meeting where this was talking about, but what do you mean by recognizing the balance between the interests of information users and rights holders?
This was a change to the ALAs. They basically added this since the last time JMRL reviewed these. So that's pretty directly from what the American Library Association is saying. And I think, it used to be, I'm going to massacre this. One of the goals of the library was to protect copyright, to make sure that our patrons weren't abusing copyright and understanding that we only work as a library by respecting copyright, understanding that publishers and folks are allowing libraries to exist to share their materials because we're going to help make sure that they're not stealing from them. So I think this is added language to say that we need to find the balance between making sure people get the resources they need and enforcing copyright law. We're not lawyers or police, you know?
Yeah, we don't know what our patrons are doing, it's what we provide. to them.
And I think the situation is, I think a lot of the discussion about libraries and copyright has changed in the post-web world, basically. Because we don't really have to worry about this with most of our digital content that circulates, like those things are baked in there. They can't copy them, you know? Whereas I think this fear came from the first time a copier showed up at a library and somebody was afraid that their book was going to be, you know, copied and somebody was going to sell out of there.
Right, wouldn't buy a book because we
Yeah.
had a copy of it.
That's my interpretation of what this is saying. It, again, the wording is a little,
I will say, Jenny, I think the current ALA says something like, it does say intellectual property rights, but then it says advocate for the interests of information users.
oh, thank you, I forgot about
And
that.
so that was another example where the ALA is putting the library in a position of advocacy. And we felt that recognize the balance is a little more put you a step back from you know, basically trying to navigate the environment you're faced with, where information users do, they want access to information and rights holders want to protect their rights. And anytime things are in tension, you want to find the right balance. Sort of a general concept for me.
Yeah, I don't really understand. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it's not my business what library users are doing with the stuff that we provide to them. We already are respecting copyright. It's already, and you said baked into our databases and our procedures and so on.
I think that's maybe not always the case everywhere, so they want to make sure you're cognizant of it. You remember when the Patriot Act was passed and we had to put those signs up in all the branches that are still, I think they're still there. There's like one, you know, just basically saying that like, hey, you know, we are respecting your right for privacy, but here's the law about it. You know, it's kind of a balance between like, you need to know what the laws are. So I would say maybe this is in line with that, where it's like, we would help people understand what the laws were about copyright, should we feel that there was a potential violation. The only time I've ever been aware of a copyright complaint was torrent streaming, when the last season of Game of Thrones came out, and we got a cease and desist from not from George R.R. Martin, but from, you know, Warner Brothers or whoever the company is that owns HBO. And it was saying, hey, somebody was on your network using this, like illegally downloading this. So we had to figure out how to shut that. Yeah, we had to change the way our Wi-Fi works. So that's where we recognized the balance and had to fall on one side over the other.
Okay, any other discussion here? So let me just be clear, I think we want to hold, like, as again from today for the employee handbook and other things. We'll either move forward with the first reading at a month from now, which will be before we meet. I think if we do that, we'll do an email poll just to confirm a last chance. Or it'll be 2 months, which will be after our next policy meeting, and then in which case we'll just have an agenda item. I'll retouch base on this and say, everybody, any last thoughts? And if not, then we proceed to a first reading after a reasonably brief agenda discussion.
Then we get,
That's with the insertion of unbiased between provide and access.
yeah,
Yes.
oh, that should be in blue then. Thank
Okay,
you, Martha.
there's nothing else here. Then we'll move to meeting and conference rooms.
Okay, so so a little brief background on why we're talking about this, and then open something up for discussion here. So the prior wording about conference rooms specifically, so JMRL has meeting rooms like this, which are designed for groups, and there's language in the beginning of this policy that says it's not for individuals. It has to be, I think, 2 or more people or something like that, 3 or more. And when the new North Side opened about 8 years ago, they added these conference rooms, which are tremendously popular, and they're meant for very small meetings or one individual to use them. The Northside staff wrote this language at the time, they drafted it for the policy committee to review. Since then, JMRL has added more of these, they were the only ones at the time, and they have, I think, there are 5 or 6 of them available. So they have a lot of supply to meet a great demand. But you'll see later in your tour of this building that Nelson has some meeting rooms, some small conference rooms rather. We are adding these pods. Ginny's going to get a pod that 2 people can sit in inside the library. It's like a little privacy pods, soundproofed to a certain extent. So it came out that there was the central library got some when the job center that was in the basement of in the lower level of the central library added some conference rooms, and then they were available for library patrons to check out as well and use. We discovered that there was a difference in interpretation of how these were used. The wording in there used to say or currently says conference rooms may be reserved in advance for a single block of time of up to 3 hours. At the conclusion of the first 3 hours, users may reserve an additional block of time up to an additional 3 hours if a room is available. When not reserved or in use, rooms may be available on a first come, first served basis with the same time limits. So at Northside, especially where they have a plethora of supply enough to meet demand, they were allowing people, or they are allowing people to book them in advance, basically to say, hey, I need this Tuesday and next Tuesday. And other branches that only had 1 or 2 weren't able to do that because they had more demand than they had supply. So the thinking here was to generalize this a bit and just say, check here for information about conference room procedures at individual branches, because they do vary in terms of what we can offer here and there. So that's why this is in front of the policy committee. But once we crack this open, I know Camille noticed some other things that need to change. Martha had mentioned some things to just kind of help organize this in a better way, that, we've got some numbered bullet points in one place and not in another. So then the question becomes, okay, well, do we want to talk about just this one thing to address what we perceive as an inconsistency for staff, or do we want to crack this open and look at it as a whole and rewrite it, or at least work on it? Camille?
I am all for cracking it open, because I think I hand this policy to more patrons than any other policy that we have, so having it in a more readable format that's more understandable for them, especially if they're signing something saying that they really understand it. Seems important.
Jenny?
And people are touchy about it.
Yeah. It's the whole meter situation, there's a high demand and a limited supply, so.
Taking a step back from that, the part that's black, struck out here reads to me as a very procedural thing.
Yeah.
We're talking about a policy. Would it be better or desirable to even just generalize this further and say, hey, at a policy level, we have meeting rooms and do good stuff. And then your handout would then be not at policy level, it would be something.
I think that was my first thought about it too. We've got procedures. Yeah.
Even sure that staff are aware that those.
I know.
And they need to be updated.
Right. And it's a lot of people to do something, like
Yeah.
the green guidelines are a whole page. And you're gonna ask people to read that in addition to the other handout that it's a lot.
So and the green guidelines are different than the general meeting room
I
guidelines.
think so, but again, I'm sure
Yeah.
that staff are really.
And that's confusing, too. You have one procedure for everybody, but then you have a procedure that covers the exact same process, individualized for different branches, which one supersedes the other one.
I think we would want one policy
Yeah.
that lays the basics, like we have these rooms, the board wants the public to be able to use them, maybe defines the 2 categories, meeting room versus conference room, and then links to a set of procedures for each location if there's variance there. So there wouldn't be an overall procedure, because I looked at the overall procedure too, and it's like call reference.
Yeah.
And nobody's ever why would they do that to get help at Green?
And if they did, they would be told to call.
Yeah, call Green, right?
Yeah.
So I think there is some stuff, Mike, it's to this is the age old Mike Powers question, right? It's like, what does the public need to know when they read this? But then also, like, what's the line between the policy and the procedure?
Yeah, it's a 2-part question. What does the public need to know to most effectively
Use the resources, yeah.
And where's the best place for that to be within our policy procedure dichotomy for that to kind of live? I will say I'm seeing some stuff that I would want to be reflected
Yeah.
at the policy level.
Yeah, you can't sell stuff.
Yeah, regardless, available for everyone regardless of beliefs and affiliations, you know.
We would want
doesn't-
something
Doesn't endorse.
free and open to the public.
Yeah,
We want to
so
make
that's
sure.
the one thing
Yeah.
I would not want to just get rid of this altogether. I would want that.
I think it would
to
still be
sort of
fairly
be-
long.
Yeah. Hopefully.
Paragraphs, yeah.
Or bullet points.
Well, that was Martha's point. Martha's point, yeah.
Yeah, my point in reading it looked like the page about conference rooms referring back to, I mean, the meeting rooms referring back to the conference things. You had to go back and forth to look and see, and if one's gonna be enumerated, the other one should be enumerated.
Well,
So it's easy to go back and forth, but I do agree with, there's a certain board level, and then that ought to be the general. It's called general specific, if that makes sense. And then it goes to the particular facilities. Because of the divergent levels of these facilities, and that gives the facility the ability to change fairly fluidly rather than filling in with a box.
I agree.
And some of this stuff under, if it's under conference rooms, also applies to the meeting room, but it's not set up here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's only said once, but it does say the following rules for meeting rooms also apply to conference.
Yeah, it's confusing.
Yeah, 1, 2, 3.
I think we could probably get into some general statements about meeting and conference rooms, and at policy level, we wouldn't have to separate it out. And then maybe I can envision a branch level handout that says, here's our meeting rooms, you know, you got A, B, and C, and here's our conference rooms, B and E. And here's what you gotta know about.
Here's how many people can fit in, here's what kind of AV we can offer, those types of things.
Okay, so we do have, so it sounds like we're converging in that direction.
Okay.
This is our last agenda item for today, is that correct?
Yeah, I think that
You have 20 minutes here, do you want to?
last thing on this, I think that branch staff will have a lot of interest in what a policy will look like here, so we could maybe even work with, like, get some bullet points.
Yeah, so can we spend 20 minutes greenfielding? Here are the high level bullet points we would like the policy to include, you know, without cutting and pasting specific wording. Or really, yeah, you can do that, or you can maybe highlight, you can just read through it and highlight it in yellow. Here's the stuff we want to keep.
Sure.
It applies across the.
That sounds like fun.
Staff want more input on the procedure. versus
Yes,
policy.
right. And we need to have some conversations to make sure that they're not like diametrically opposed
Especially when branches are very.
when they're close to each other. Like, we don't want something that's like dogs are allowed here, dogs aren't allowed there, right? So we would there'll have to be some oversight system wide, but
But there are definitely some more policy level things here that we could just easily, like most of the first paragraph
Would say.
would stay. And then the second paragraph gets into the 3 hours per day and the 15-minute, that's like procedural stuff. That's not policy stuff.
I think things that are generally applicable for eligibility would stay here, and so I'm looking at commercial products.
I think the things that come to my attention in the most frequency are, can people sell stuff? So this is very important to be able to point to
Right.
say like, hey, the board doesn't
You would
want that.
repeat that on your branch level handout, but you would be pointing to, okay, the board says. It's on the handout because the board had said. So,
Yeah, that's.
yeah, I don't know if you need the first priority, really. I mean,
Yeah, I would think you would want that first sentence
That's some confusion with that too.
you know,
about I mean, I even wonder, Krista, about this more than 2 people. Is it time to revisit that? You know, because we see, I don't know, I'm not dealing with it on a day-to-day basis, but how often are people calling you and looking for a room that they want to book in advance and it's only 1 or 2 people? And how are you, right, so how are you responding now?
We can't. we would send them to
You
the
can't
things.
do it.
Can't do it,
So
show up.
Right.
is that a barrier? You know, I think that was because we want to keep them available for groups, you know, for a meeting like this. But I think the thing that we've always pointed to, Krista, you and I use all the time, is that line in here that says, these rooms are not available for social gatherings, which is another one that we should look at. Yeah. And are not intended for the conduct of daily business or regular office hours. So I think that this latter part of that sentence covers a lot of these things where it's like, if somebody needs to come and use the room, sometimes we get calls from people that need to do a deposition or something, you know, and it needs to be just two people or whatnot. And we have to say, no, here's our rules and regulations. But I think as long as we looked at this as saying like, well, you can't make this your office, but if you need it once or twice for this purpose, then like, do we have a problem with that? Does the board have a problem with that, really?
Well, in this case, I would put it in the conference room, not me.
Right, not everybody has, yeah. Yeah, so maybe it is as a
Like we have a guy. who's
tutors comes up a lot.
ESL tutor. He seems to be coming every Saturday, right? There's only two, so we told him he can't schedule it. But he's in there every Saturday that I've been in there lately, so, but to me, that's something. That's not office hours, I don't know.
Well,
I mean-
he's a tutor, he's doing it for free, it's literacy volunteers.
Right, yeah, it's not a commercial.
And we have a guy that wants to do one of the conference rooms on Sundays, because he's writing a book. And he's interviewing somebody to write the book. And more often than not, he can just show up at a room's available, so that's not good an issue.
Yeah.
I mean, it feels to me what I'm hearing is this is more of these examples to me are more of a frequency issue of how, if you're one user, how frequently can you sort of reserve this? And of course, the balance you're trying to strike is make it, we want it, yeah, if they show up and we want it to be used
Yeah,
rather than not
used,
used. But we want somebody else to not be locked out by
We don't want someone to monopolize
Right,
the
exactly. So
availability.
that's need a balance.
And we did look at some other libraries that are like, you can only use it this many times a month. And I don't think staff want to get into that because it's a matter of trying to kind of police.
Turn our north side, because of course, depending on who's keeping in track and how much.
Yeah. You're right, Camille, that this policy and this procedure, there's the most kind of questions all the time from the public.
That's staff.
Yeah, and staff.
But the interpretation, yeah, if people have different situations they describe to you, and you then have to take it to this and try to figure out how that fits in your.
People don't tell you what they don't tell you that they're selling something, but in fact, they are.
Right, and then
Or
when you get there and
they
back,
might not be
thing.
selling, but they want to get a list of attendees on their phone.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah.
I think,
And what do we do in that case?
We've had groups use, and we've had to go in and say, you can't do this, you can do it outside.
So but if it's happened back in the app.
We don't know. I didn't know, and we warn them if it's,
If we
What I'm
find-
getting at, is there something that you can point to say, no? we
Yes.
won't Give you the address.
Yeah.
well, no soliciting, I think.
But once it happened, then they say.
Do we have to define soliciting? Is collecting emails and writing
Yeah.
and contact information not soliciting?
I think you can't require, right?
People want more information.
Yeah.
They want to bring it down.
I think that's fine.
It can't be required that you sign in the email address that they can follow.
Yeah, we had a situation in Louisa where it was somebody was saying like, you can't come in unless you leave your contact information here.
Put that on the, just the ending list of.
Yeah.
Which-
Just the concept that, and maybe it is in the wording somewhere, but the concept that providing, you can't require attendees to provide information.
Or to sign in. You have that.
Yeah, we've had that
Yeah,
too.
we've also had them ask, well, if it's just for asking for donations, I'm like, no, you're not requiring people to pay, but if you're asking them for donations, that's not allowed either.
Sometimes it's beforehand and there's like a flyer in the community and somebody will bring it to our attention that's like, come to this thing, it's $10, it's at the Greene County Library. And we'll have to contact the person who booked the room and say, hey, I'm sorry, that needs to come down. And that is addressed in here very clearly. I think it says that the something about advertising, it needs to be clear that it's not the library. I don't know where that was. I think this one too needs to be generalized. This is folks that have access to their meeting rooms after hours. We get a lot of questions about this too.
Yeah, but it talks about janitorial service fees or fees. I mean, when does that ever come up? What would that fee be?
It was Jimmy Smith for the Sunday
Yeah,
stuff, yeah.
that's it. I mean, if you told me you wanted to stay after, I wouldn't even know, but I'm just gonna make up a fee. You know, I don't know.
That's a good point.
We have told the janitorial crews, we're staying open late, because it's a library event, it's an after-hours library event, or it's a book festival event that doesn't end at 7 o'clock on a Friday. We just tell the janitors, don't come till it's over, but it's not like we.
I think generally, so if Ginny called me and said, hey, this group wants to use the meeting room after hours. This is also for folks that have not,
Separate.
they have a separate entrance, like this room is available after hours. The entrance can let you in here and not let you into the library. The generally, we'd have to work with staff to see if somebody would be available, or in Louisa, it was turn the key over and somebody else uses it. And then we had issues. That was when we had some compliance issues with our policy. And it was kind of like, well, you know, if it's after hours, does the policy still count? The answer was yes. Yeah. So that maybe could use some clarification, Mike, after hours usage in general.
Yeah,
But then it still comes back to, is that a policy or procedure?
Yeah, maybe. And it doesn't impact every branch, not every branch. Well, every branch could offer that, like, you know, I want to book your meeting room at midnight tonight. Can I hire staff to stay there? That's in here. It's janitorial time.
All right, well, it looks like we found a productive vein of smoothing, the experience with staff and public. We can get this a better version of it. Here, thinking through it, I wonder if eventually when we have a streamlined, principle-based version of this, would the board also want to see that, hey, here's the procedures that we're doing at the same time, so they can see some of these things are covered, maybe they were here, maybe not.
I mean, I'm happy to share it with them, understanding that it wouldn't be policy, it wouldn't be, you know, the board might have feedback on it, but if it's like, oh,
I'm just
actually.
envisioning someone saying, if we strike out the after hours and you move that procedure, you know, but I'm reading after hours here and comparing, you know, a board member might say, oh, well, what are you gonna do about, and then.
Yeah, I could
the
see
answer would be,
something.
well, we thought about it, it's in the procedure, and here's what the procedure said.
Okay.
I mean, that raises the barrier of, you gotta get all that together at the same time that we would enact this. I mean, this seems like the 2 meetings down the road type thing anyway.
I think getting those procedures in line is a bear. There's a lot of stuff.
Yeah, right.
There's a lot of stuff that we need to work out.
The procedures have
But-
things like
None of these.
that maybe, I mean, maybe this is procedural, but I would like to have as little as possible in the local procedure to be able to hand people. And then have the local procedures up on the MRBS system where when people are looking, they can see it, for one thing, rather than having to hand them paper, but things like that, you can't have an open, no alcohol, you know.
So those are probably in that generic one.
Yeah.
they're under the meeting room guidelines on the webpage, so yeah, right there.
So it's like, oh, this is the schedule, not the.
My
policy.
larger point, David, with just timing
Yeah.
would be, I take your point that it's gonna require, I think, probably some kind of working group to dig into this. But if we were to pass a streamlined policy without having that, there would be kind of a gap, a coverage
Yeah.
gap where the public wouldn't have
I don't-
information other than maybe what's on the website right there.
That's fine. I don't think that this has to happen right this second
Yeah.
project. I think it's gonna be long and involved, and I'd rather get started on it if we're gonna do it, but it's not like, oh man, we gotta get these in place by June 1. Like, we can continue to operate as we've operated for however many years under this.
Yeah.
Knowing that we're working on
Yeah, I
it.
think that it's not a specific deadline. Other than, but again, right, the things you're bringing that you're initially bringing.
Yeah.
The red lines. They themselves are not time urgent.
No, I mean, currently, yeah, currently we are having a discussion about different interpretations of this wording.
Right.
But we can continue to have that discussion while the policy committee works on
Right.
this.
So it seems to me we need to. Small groups of, one policy drafter to.
Camille sounded very interested.
Some of that, and then we need
It's gonna have
I'm
to
more of a
be.
procedure
no,
draft.
no, we need a procedure.
It's rich.
I'm gonna have to have some guidance.
But we have any, they don't have to be the same folks working on those two things necessarily. I mean, obviously, they're gonna need to coordinate. So do we have any, it sounds like. But
Camille,
maybe you're in
Jenny?
charge of wrangling up the
Yeah.
staff piece of it.
It's gonna be the branch managers.
It will be, yeah, they're
Agreeing
gonna
on what
want.
Goes for everybody and what doesn't for everybody.
So they'll be meeting in a few weeks. We'll talk about it generally. I'll get a few people outside this committee maybe to help on the procedures end, and then we can work on here's the stuff that needs to be policy.
Okay, and does anybody want to kind of be the owner of at the policy level of trying to streamline down to the underlying principles?
I think we can do that when we're doing, we'll figure out what's policy versus procedure and what goes for everybody.
I think we can take a little staff subcommittee here. I heard some interest and we can get together and see if we have a draft at least, or a bullet point list of here's what needs to be in there.
Yeah, and I think the experiences that branches are bringing to the table on that will really highlight what needs to be changed, what needs to be articulated.
Yeah, I think we just have to have somebody from Northside involved too,
Yes,
just
yeah.
because they have the most conference room usage and so. Rosé too, and they're getting a pod as well. Yeah, they're getting a double wide pod, yeah.
So David, we'll let you mix that into your
Yeah.
own
We'll work on it.
priorities and time, and meeting demands.
Yep.
And just ask you for a report on that at our next policy committee meeting in 2 months.
Perfect.
That may or may not involve actual wording for us to look at, but we'll leave that open to you. You'll let us know as far as progress.
That's-
Okay, that is everything I have for today. There's no other items. We'll adjourn.
Thank you all.